The morning sun was just starting to peek over the dusty hills when Maria stepped out of her small house to check on her animals. She wrapped her worn shawl tighter around her shoulders as the cool desert air hit her face. Life hadn't been easy since her husband passed away 2 years ago, leaving her alone to raise 12-year-old Carlos and 8-year-old Sofia on their tiny ranch outside Phoenix. Every morning was the same routine. Feed the chickens, check on their 3 remaining cows, and hope that today would bring some good news. Maybe someone would buy one of her homemade quilts at the market, or perhaps the neighbors would need help with their harvest. Any little bit of money helped keep food on the table and the lights on as Maria walked toward the chicken coop. Something caught her eye near the fence that separated her property from the empty land beyond. At first, she thought it might be a bag of trash that had blown in during last night's windstorm. But as she got closer, her heart started beating faster. It wasn't trash at all. A young man lay crumpled on the ground, his face pressed against the dirt. His clothes were torn and dirty, and he wasn't moving. Maria's first thought was to run back to the house and lock the doors. In these parts, you never knew what kind of trouble might find you. But something made her stop and look closer. The stranger looked young, maybe in his 20s, with dark hair that was dusty and matted. His breathing was shallow, as she could see that his lips were cracked and dry. One of his legs was twisted at an odd angle, and there was dried blood on his jeans. This wasn't some dangerous criminal. This was someone who needed help and needed it fast. Maria knelt down beside him and gently touched his shoulder. His skin was burning hot with fever, but he was shivering at the same time. She had seen this before when her husband got sick with pneumonia. The young man was in serious trouble. "Hey, can you hear me?" she whispered, but there was no response. She tried again, a little louder this time. "You're going to be okay. I'm here to help." His eyes fluttered open for just a moment, unfocused and glassy. He tried to say something, but only a weak groan came out before his eyes closed again. Maria knew she had to act quickly. The smart thing would be to call for an ambulance. But Maria knew they didn't have money for hospital bills. Even if they did, the nearest hospital was 40 miles away, and the ambulance might not come out this far for someone who looked like a drifter. She had heard stories of people being turned away from emergency rooms because they couldn't pay. She looked back at her house, thinking about Carlos and Sofia who were still sleeping inside. What if this stranger was dangerous? What if bringing him into their home put her children at risk? But then she looked down at his face again. He looked so young and helpless, not much older than Carlos would be in a few years. Maria made her decision. She couldn't live with herself if she left someone to die on her property, especially when she might be able to help. Her grandmother had always told her that helping others in need was the right thing to do. Even when it was hard, she hurried back to the house and quietly woke up Carlos. "I need your help with something important," she whispered, not wanting to wake Sofia just yet. "There's someone outside who is very sick, and we need to bring him inside." Carlos rubbed his eyes and looked confused. "Who is it, Mom?" "I don't know, but he needs our help. Can you be brave and help me?" Carlos nodded, even though Maria could see he was scared. Together, they went back outside to where the stranger lay unconscious. It took both of them working together to lift him, and he was heavier than he looked. The young man mumbled something as they moved him, but the words didn't make sense. They managed to get him into the house and onto the old couch in their small living room. Maria sent Carlos to get blankets while she examined the stranger more carefully. His leg was definitely injured, probably broken or badly sprained. The wound looked infected, with red streaks spreading up from where something had clearly hurt him badly. When Sofia woke up and saw the stranger on their couch, her eyes went wide with worry. "Is he going to die, Mama?" Maria smoothed her daughter's hair and tried to sound confident. "No, sweetheart. We're going to take good care of him until he gets better. But it might take a while." Over the next few hours, Maria did everything she could think of to help. She cleaned his wounds with warm water and the antiseptic she kept for when the children got cuts. She gave him small sips of water whenever he was conscious enough to drink. She covered him with every blanket they owned to help break his fever. The Hardest part was not knowing who he was or what had happened to him. He had no wallet, no identification, nothing that would tell them his name or where he came from. His clothes looked like those of a ranch hand or cowboy, but they were so worn and dirty it was hard to tell. By afternoon, Maria was exhausted but determined. She had used almost all of their clean towels and bandages. The small bottle of antiseptic was nearly empty, but the stranger's breathing seemed a little easier, and his fever felt like it might be starting to break. Carlos and Sofia had been wonderful helpers all day. Carlos had boiled water and brought fresh towels without being asked. Sofia had sat quietly nearby, sometimes talking softly to the unconscious man like he could hear her. Both children seemed to understand that this was important, that their family was doing something that mattered. As evening approached, Maria realized they would need more supplies if the stranger was going to recover. The infection in his leg was serious, and she worried it might get worse without proper medicine. But antibiotics cost money they didn't have, and the veterinarian in town charged almost as much as a regular doctor. She looked at the tin box where she kept their emergency money. There was barely $50 left from selling eggs at the farmer's market. It was supposed to last them the rest of the month for groceries, but what choice did she have? That night, after the children were asleep, Maria sat in the chair next to the couch and watched the stranger sleep. Sometimes he would mutter words she couldn't understand, and once he called out what sounded like "Dad" in a voice full of pain. Whatever had brought him to her fence, whatever had left him broken and alone in the desert, Maria knew she had made the right choice in helping him. She didn't know his name, didn't know where he came from, and didn't know if he had family somewhere wondering where he was. All she knew was that tomorrow she would go to town and spend their grocery money on medicine to save a stranger's life. Because that's what her heart told her was right, and Maria had learned long ago to trust her heart, even when her head said it. The next morning, Maria woke up before sunrise and quietly checked on their unexpected guest. The young man was still burning with fever, but at least he was breathing steadily. She had been up several times during the night, changing his wet cloths and giving him tiny sips of water whenever he stirred. Carlos was already awake in the kitchen, making coffee the way his father had taught him before he passed away. Even at 12 years old, he understood that his mom needed all the help she could get. "How is he doing?" Carlos whispered, not wanting to wake his little sister. "A little better, I think," Maria replied, though she wasn't really sure. She had never taken care of someone this sick before. When her husband was dying, they had been in the hospital with real doctors and nurses. Here, she only had her grandmother's old remedies and whatever medical knowledge she had picked up over the years. Sofia appeared in the doorway, rubbing her sleepy eyes. "Can I help take care of the cowboy today?" she asked. That's what she had started calling him, the cowboy. Because of his worn boots and the way he was dressed, Maria smiled at her daughter's eagerness to help. "Yes, sweetheart, but we have to be very gentle with him. He's still very sick." After a simple breakfast of eggs and toast, Maria sent Carlos to do his morning chores while she and Sofia focused on caring for their patient. The infection in his leg looked worse today, with more red streaks spreading upward. Maria knew she couldn't wait any longer to get medicine. "Sofia, I need you to stay here and watch him while Carlos and I go to town," Maria said, counting the money in their emergency tin one more time. "If he wakes up, give him small sips of water, okay? And if anything scary happens, you run to Mrs. Rodriguez next door." The trip to town felt like it took forever. Maria's old truck coughed and wheezed as it climbed the hills, and she worried the whole time that it might break down. Carlos sat quietly in the passenger seat, understanding that this was serious business. At the veterinary clinic, Dr. Martinez looked surprised when Maria explained what she needed. "Antibiotics for a person?" he asked, raising his eyebrows. "Maria, I can't prescribe medicine for humans." "Please," Maria begged. "He'll die if I don't get him help, and we can't afford the hospital." "I know you have antibiotics that work for people too." My husband used to get the same medicine for his infections. Dr. Martinez looked around his clinic, then back at Maria's desperate face. He had known her family for years and had seen how hard she worked to keep everything together after her husband died. Finally, he sighed and went to his medicine cabinet. "I'm giving you antibiotics for your sick calf," he said with a meaningful look. "Make sure you follow the dosage instructions exactly. And Maria, if this doesn't work in 3 days, you have to take him to the hospital, no matter what it costs." The medicine cost $38, nearly all of their emergency money. On the way home, they stopped at the grocery store and bought only the most basic items: rice, beans, and a few cans of soup. It would have to last them until Maria could sell more quilts or find some other way to earn money. When they got back home, Sophia met them at the door with exciting news. "Mama, he woke up. He drank a whole cup of water and he said, 'Thank you.'" To me. Sure enough, when Maria entered the living room, the stranger's eyes were open. They were a deep brown color, and although he still looked very weak, there was awareness in them that hadn't been there before. "Ma'am," he said in a hoarse voice, trying to sit up. "I don't know how I got here, but thank you for helping me." "Don't try to move yet," Maria said gently, pushing him back down onto the couch. "You're very sick and you need to rest. What's your name?" The young man was quiet for a moment, as if thinking was difficult. "Jake," he finally said. "My name is Jake." "Well, Jake, I'm Maria, and these are my children, Carlos and Sofia. You've been unconscious for almost 2 days. Do you remember what happened to you?" Jake closed his eyes, concentrating. "I was working on a ranch about 50 miles from here. Got kicked by a horse pretty bad." He gestured weakly toward his injured leg. "I think I tried to walk to find help, but I don't remember much after that." Over the next few days, Maria, Carlos, and Sofia worked together to nurse Jake back to health. Maria gave him the antibiotics exactly as Dr. Martinez had instructed, while Carlos helped by keeping fresh water by the couch and bringing clean towels whenever they were needed. Sofia appointed herself as Jake's entertainment committee. She would sit cross-legged on the floor next to the couch and read him stories from her school books, or tell him about their chickens and cows. Jake seemed to enjoy her chatter, and Maria noticed that he always perked up when Sofia was around. The medicine worked slowly but surely. Each day, Jake's fever got a little lower, and the red streaks on his leg began to fade. By the end of the first week, he was able to sit up and eat small meals that Maria prepared. He was still very weak, but the dangerous part seemed to be over. During his recovery, Jake learned about the family that had saved his life. He discovered that Maria was struggling to keep the ranch running since her husband died. He saw how Carlos tried to act like the man of the house, doing chores that were really too big for a 12-year-old boy. He watched Sofia play with dolls that were patched and mended because there was no money for new toys. Most of all, he saw how Maria never complained, even though she was clearly worried about money and tired from taking care of everyone. She would get up early to take care of the animals, spend the day nursing him back to health, help the children with their homework, and still find time to work on her quilts late into the night. "Why did you help me?" Jake asked one evening when the children were asleep. "You don't even know me. I could be anyone." Maria looked up from the quilt she was stitching. "My grandmother used to say that we're all just walking each other home," she said simply. "When someone falls down along the way, you help them get back up. That's just what people do." Jake stared at the ceiling, thinking about her words. In his experience, that wasn't what people did at all. Most people looked out for themselves first and worried about others later, if they worried about them at all. But this family had risked everything to save a stranger, even when they could barely take care of themselves. As the second week passed, Jake grew stronger. He started insisting on helping around the house, even though Maria protested that he should rest. He would fold laundry while sitting on the couch or help Sofia with her math homework. Small things, but it made him feel less like a burden and more like he was contributing something to the family that had given him everything. What Jake didn't tell them was that every day he felt more guilty about accepting their help. Not because he didn't deserve it, but because he knew he could repay them in ways they couldn't imagine. The problem was, if he told them the truth about who he really was. By the third week, Jake was able to walk around the house without help, though he still moved slowly and carefully. His leg was healing well, but it would be a while before he could put his full weight on it. What bothered him more than the physical pain was watching Maria count and recount the few dollars left in their emergency tin every morning. He had seen her do it when she thought no one was looking. She would sit at the kitchen table with a calculator, writing numbers on the back of an old envelope, trying to figure out how to make their money stretch until she could earn more. Sometimes she would erase the numbers and start over, as if different math might somehow create a better outcome. Jake knew they were running low on food because the portions at dinner had gotten smaller. Maria always insisted she wasn't very hungry and would give most of her food to the children. When Jake tried to give her some of his portion back, she would shake her head and say that growing boys needed more food than she did. "This is nonsense," Jake said to himself one morning while Maria was outside feeding the chickens. He couldn't stand feeling useless any longer. Despite his still weak leg, he made his way outside to find her. "Maria," he called out as she scattered grain for the chickens. "I need to start helping around here. I can't just lie around eating your food while you work so hard." Maria turned around with a surprised look on her face. "Jake, you're still recovering. The doctor said you need to rest for at least another week." "The veterinarian said that," Jake corrected with a small smile. "And I've been resting for 3 weeks. I'm going crazy just sitting inside all day. Please, let me help with something." Before Maria could protest further, Carlos came running around the corner of the house. "Mom, the fence is broken again where the big posts are. 3 of our cows got into Mr. Peterson's field, and he's really mad about it." Maria's face went pale. Mr. Peterson was their grumpy neighbor who had complained before about their animals wandering onto his property. If their cows damaged his crops, he might demand money they didn't have, or worse, he might call the county about their fence violations. "I'll go talk to him," Maria said, but Jake could see the worry in her eyes. "No, let me go," Jake said. "I know how to deal with angry ranchers, and I can fix that fence too. I've been mending fences since I was Carlos's age." Despite Maria's protests, Jake limped over to where the fence had broken. 3 wooden posts had rotted through at the base, and the wire was sagging so low that even their smallest cow could step over it. It was the kind of repair that required heavy lifting and precise work, exactly what his injured leg didn't need, but Jake was determined. He sent Carlos to ask their neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, if they could borrow some tools. While they waited, Jake examined the broken fence and started planning the repair in his head. It reminded him of summer days when he was younger, before everything went wrong with his family, when he actually enjoyed working with his hands. When Carlos returned with the tools, Jake taught him how to dig out the old fence posts and measure for new ones. It was slow work, and Jake had to stop frequently to rest his leg, but Carlos was eager to learn and surprisingly strong for his age. "My dad used to fix fences," Carlos said as they worked. "Before he got sick, he taught me a little bit, but I wasn't big enough to do the heavy parts." "Well, you're getting bigger every day," Jake replied, impressed by how quickly Carlos picked up the techniques. "By the time I'm completely healed, you'll probably be better at this than I am." Sophia appeared with a jug of water and some sandwiches Maria had made. She sat in the shade of a nearby tree and kept them company while they worked, chattering about her school friends and asking Jake questions about all the different ranches he had worked on. "Have you been to California?" she wanted to know. "My teacher says they have horses there that are trained to dance." Jake laughed, the first real laugh Maria had heard from him since he'd been there. "I haven't seen any dancing horses, but I did work on a ranch in California where they trained horses for movies." "Really? Like cowboy movies?" "Sometimes. Mostly they trained them to do simple things like stop on command or not be afraid of loud noises. The movie stars weren't usually very good riders, so the horses had to be extra patient." As Jake told stories about his travels, Carlos worked steadily beside him, and Sophia listened with wide eyes. Maria watched from the kitchen window, amazed at how natural Jake was with her children. Carlos had been trying so hard to be the man of the house since his father died, but with Jake there, he could just be a kid who was learning new skills. And Sophia, who was sometimes shy around strangers, chattered away like Jake was an old friend. The fence repair took most of the day. But when they finished, it was stronger than it had been in years. Jake had shown Carlos how to set the post deep and brace them properly so they wouldn't rot as quickly. More importantly, he had given the boy confidence that he could handle bigger responsibilities around the ranch. That evening at dinner, Carlos couldn't stop talking about everything Jake had taught him. "Mom, did you know that if you put rocks around the bottom of fence posts, they last longer? And Jake showed me how to twist the wire so it stays tight even when the cows push against it." Maria smiled as she listened to her son's excited chatter. She had been worried about Carlos growing up too fast, trying to fill his father's shoes before he was ready. But today, working alongside Jake, he had seemed like a normal 12-year-old boy learning from an older brother or uncle. After the children went to bed, Maria found Jake sitting on the front porch, looking out at the desert under the starry sky. His leg was obviously bothering him after the day's work, but he looked more content than she had seen him since he arrived. "Thank you for today," she said, sitting down in the chair next to him. "Carlos needed that more than you know." "He's a good kid," Jake replied. "Smart, too. He picked up those fence techniques faster than some grown men I've worked with." "His father would have been proud," Maria said softly. "He always said Carlos had good hands for ranch work." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the desert. Finally, Jake spoke up. "Maria, I know you're struggling with money. I can see it in the way you count every dollar and skip meals to feed the rest of us." Maria started to protest, but Jake held up his hand. "I'm not criticizing, I'm amazed by it. Most people wouldn't have taken in a stranger in the first place, let alone sacrifice their own food to help him recover. We do what we have to do," Maria said simply. "But you don't have to do it alone anymore," Jake said, turning to look at her directly. "I may not have much money right now, but I know ranching. I can help you make this place profitable again. Those cows of yours could be worth a lot more if they were properly managed. And that back pasture could support twice as many animals if it was irrigated correctly." Maria felt a flutter of hope in her chest, something she hadn't felt in a long time. "You'd really want to stay and help? Even after you're completely healed?" Jake was quiet for a moment, thinking about her question. The truth was complicated. He could make one phone call and solve all of their money problems instantly. But he had found something here that he had never had before, a family that valued him for who he was, not what he could provide. The thought of losing that terrified him. Three months had passed since Maria found Jake collapsed by her fence, and life at the small ranch had settled into a comfortable rhythm. Jake's leg had healed completely, and he had become an essential part of their daily routine. Every morning, he would wake up before sunrise to help Carlos with the animals, while Maria prepared breakfast and got Sophia ready for school. What surprised Maria most was how naturally Jake had fit into their family. He never tried to replace the children's father or act like he was in charge. Instead, he found his own place among them, like a piece of a puzzle that they hadn't known was missing. Carlos had grown 2 inches taller and gained a confidence that made Maria's heart swell with pride. Under Jake's patient guidance, her son had learned to ride their old horse properly, rope cattle, and fix almost anything that broke around the ranch. More importantly, Carlos had started laughing again, something Maria realized she hadn't heard nearly enough of since his father died. "Watch this, Mom," Carlos called out one Saturday morning as he demonstrated a new roping technique Jake had taught him. The lasso sailed through the air and settled perfectly around a fence post, just as Jake had shown him. "That's amazing, sweetheart," Maria called back, but her eyes were on Jake, who was watching Carlos with the proud expression of an older brother. There was something in Jake's face that made her wonder about his own family. In all these months he had never mentioned parents or siblings, never talked about anyone who might be worried about him. Sophia had blossomed under Jake's attention too. He helped her with homework every evening, sitting patiently at the kitchen table while she worked through math problems or practiced reading. When she struggled with words, he never made her feel stupid. Instead, he would tell her stories that somehow related to whatever she was learning, making everything more interesting. "Jake, why do we need to learn about fractions?" Sophia asked. One evening, frustrated with her homework. "Well," Jake said, thinking for a moment, "let's say you're making cookies for your friends at school. If you want to make half a batch, you need to know fractions to cut the recipe in half. Or if you're sharing a pizza with Carlos, you need to know that half is bigger than a quarter." "Oh." Sophia's face lit up with understanding. "So fractions help us share things fairly." "Exactly," Jake smiled. "Math isn't just numbers on paper, it's everywhere in real life." Maria watched these interactions from the kitchen while she cooked dinner, and each time she felt something warm and unfamiliar stirring in her chest. She had been alone for so long, focused entirely on survival and taking care of her children. She had forgotten what it felt like to have someone share the daily responsibilities of family life. But it wasn't just the help with chores and homework that affected her. It was the way Jake remembered that Carlos liked his eggs scrambled, but Sophia preferred them sunny side up. It was how he always saved the last piece of cornbread for Maria, even though she had seen him eyeing it hungrily. It was the way he listened when she talked about her worries, really listened instead of just waiting for his turn to speak. One evening after the children were asleep, Maria and Jake sat on the front porch as had become their habit. The desert air was cool and filled with the sound of crickets, and the stars seemed brighter than usual. "Jake," Maria said carefully, "can I ask you something personal?" "Of course," he replied, though she noticed him tense up slightly. "You never talk about your family. Don't you have people somewhere who are worried about you?" Jake was quiet for a long time, staring out at the dark horizon. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with old pain. "I had a falling out with my father a few years ago. We said things to each other that can't be taken back. I left home and haven't spoken to him since." "What did you fight about?" "He wanted me to be someone I wasn't," Jake said simply. "He had plans for my life that didn't match what I wanted for myself. When I refused to follow his plan, he said I was throwing away everything he had worked to give me. I said he never cared about what made me happy, only about what made him look good." Maria could hear the hurt in his voice. "Do you miss him?" "Sometimes," Jake admitted. "But I could never go back to living the way he wanted me to live. Here, with you and the kids, I can be myself. I can work with my hands, help things grow, make a real difference in people's lives. That means more to me than anything he could offer." Maria reached over and touched his hand gently. "I'm sorry you had to choose between your family and your happiness. That must have been very hard." The simple gesture of comfort sent a shock through Jake's system. It had been so long since anyone had touched him with genuine care, without wanting something in return. He looked down at Maria's small hand covering his and felt a rush of emotions he hadn't experienced in years. "Maria," he said softly, "I need you to know how much this means to me. Being here, being part of your family, it's given me something I never thought I'd have." "What's that?" "A home," he said, looking into her eyes. "A real home where people care about each other." Maria felt her heart skip a beat. The way Jake was looking at her, the gentle tone of his voice, made her realize that her own feelings had been growing stronger too. She had started looking forward to their evening conversations more than anything else in her day. She found herself thinking about him while she worked, wondering what he would think about something funny Sophia had said, or feeling proud when she saw him teaching Carlos a new skill, but the thought of opening her heart again also terrified her. She had loved her husband deeply, and when he died, the pain had nearly destroyed her. Could she risk feeling that vulnerable again? "Jake," she whispered, "I care about you too. More than I should, maybe. Why shouldn't you?" he asked, moving. slightly closer to her. Because I don't really know anything about you, she said, though even as she spoke, she knew it wasn't entirely true. She knew he was kind and patient with her children. She knew he worked harder than anyone had a right to expect. She knew he had a gentle heart and strong hands and a laugh that made her feel like everything would be okay. What do you want to? No? Jake asked. Maria thought for a moment. Tell me about your dreams. What do you want your life to look like? Jake smiled, and for the first time since she had known him, he looked completely relaxed. I want to wake up every morning in a place where I belong. I want to work land that means something to me, with people who value what I do. I want to teach kids how to be responsible and kind, and I want to come home every evening to someone who's glad to see me. That sounds like a good dream, Maria said softly. The thing is, Jake continued, I'm already living it. Right here. With you and Carlos and Sophia, I just hope I get to keep it. They sat in comfortable silence after that, both lost in their own thoughts. Maria was thinking about how much her life had changed since the morning she found Jake by her fence. Her days were easier now, not just because of the work he did, but because she no longer felt like she was carrying everything alone. Jake was thinking about the secret he was keeping, the truth about his background that grew heavier every day. He knew he should tell Maria about his real family, about the money and power he had walked away from, but he was terrified that if she knew the truth, she would see him differently. She might think he had been playing some kind of game with them, or worse, that he had been lying because he thought they weren't good enough to know the real him. The truth was much more complicated than that. For the first time in his life, Jake had found people who loved. It was a Tuesday morning in late October when the letter arrived that would change everything. Maria was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when she heard the mail truck pull up to their mailbox. Carlos ran to collect the mail, as he did every day, hoping for letters from his pen pal at school or maybe a magazine, but when Carlos came back to the house, his face was pale and worried. Mom, he called out, holding a thick white envelope. There's a letter here from the bank. It looks important. Maria felt her stomach drop. Letters from the bank were never good news. She dried her hands on her apron and took the envelope with trembling fingers. The return address confirmed her worst fears. First National Bank. Mortgage Department. Jake was fixing a broken gate near the barn when he heard Maria cry out. He dropped his tools and ran toward the house, his heart pounding. He found her sitting on the front steps with the letter in her lap, tears streaming down her face. Maria, what's wrong? He asked, kneeling down beside her. She handed him the letter without saying a word. Jake read it quickly and his face grew dark with anger. The bank was demanding immediate payment of $15,000 in back mortgage payments, plus fees and penalties. If the money wasn't paid within 30 days, they would begin foreclosure proceedings. This can't be right, Jake said, reading the letter again. How did you get so far behind? Maria wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. After my husband died, I tried to keep up with all the payments. But the medical bills from his cancer treatment took everything we had, I thought. I had worked out a payment plan with the bank, but they say I missed too many payments. Carlos had been listening from the doorway, and now he came outside and sat down next to his mother. What does foreclosure mean? He asked in a small voice. It means they can take our house away, Maria said, trying to keep her voice steady. For her son's sake. If we can't pay what we owe, we'll have to move somewhere else. Sophia appeared in the doorway, rubbing her eyes. She had been taking a nap and was confused by all the commotion. Why is everyone crying? She asked. Jake looked at the three faces around him, Maria trying to be strong while her world fell apart, Carlos struggling to understand problems too big for a 12-year-old, and little Sophia sensing that something terrible was happening, but not knowing what. In that moment, Jake made a decision that he knew would change everything. How much money do you have saved? He asked Maria quietly. About $400, she replied. I was saving it to buy feed for the winter. Jake did quick math in his head. Even if they sold everything they owned, the cows, the chickens, Maria's quilting supplies, his horse, they might raise $3,000 or $4,000. It wouldn't be nearly enough. Over the next few days, Maria threw herself into a desperate search for solutions. She called every bank in the county, trying to find someone who would give her a loan or extend her payment plan. But without a steady income or valuable collateral, no one was willing to help Dot. She contacted a lawyer who specialized in helping people avoid foreclosure, but his fees alone would cost more money than they had. She even swallowed her pride and called her sister in California, who she hadn't spoken to in 2 years after an argument about money. But her sister's husband had been laid off from his job, and they were struggling with their own bills. Jake watched Maria grow thinner and more worried each day. She stopped eating regular meals, claiming she wasn't hungry, but he knew she was trying to save every penny they had. She worked on her quilts late into the night, hoping to finish enough to sell at the weekend market. "Mom, you need to eat something," Carlos said one evening, pushing his plate toward her at dinner. "I'm fine, sweetheart," Maria replied, but Jake could see the exhaustion in her eyes. That night, after the children were asleep, Jake found Maria sitting at the kitchen table with a calculator and a pile of papers. She was adding and subtracting the same numbers over and over, as if she could somehow make the math work out differently. "Maria," Jake said gently, sitting down across from her, "you need to get some sleep. I keep thinking there has to be something I'm missing," she said without looking up. "Some way to make this work. Maybe if I sell my wedding ring or if I can find a second job in town." "Your wedding ring won't be worth more than a few $100s," Jake said. "And if you take a job in town, who's going to watch the kids after school? You'd have to pay for childcare, which would eat up most of what you earned." Maria finally looked up at him, and Jake could see the desperation in her eyes. "Then what do you suggest?" "Because I'm running out of ideas and I'm running out of time." Jake was quiet for a long moment. He knew exactly how to solve this problem. One phone call to his father's lawyers and the mortgage could be paid off within hours. But making that call would mean admitting who he really was, and he was terrified of how Maria would react. "Maybe there's someone in your family who could help," he suggested carefully. "Someone you haven't thought of yet." "There's no one," Maria said flatly. "My parents died when I was young, my sister can't help, and my husband's family never approved of our marriage. We're on our own." "What about asking the bank for more time? Maybe if you explained your situation." "I've already tried that 3 times. They say they've been more than patient already." Maria's voice broke slightly. "Jake, I think we're going to lose everything." The next day, Maria made the heartbreaking decision to start looking for jobs in Phoenix. If they were going to lose the ranch anyway, she needed to find a way to support her family in the city. The thought of leaving the land her husband had loved, the home where they had built their life together, was almost unbearable. But even worse was the thought of what this would mean for Carlos and Sofia. Carlos would have to leave the only home he had ever known, give up his dreams of becoming a rancher like his father. Sofia would have to start over at a new school, make new friends, leave behind the wide-open spaces where she could run and play freely. Jake watched the family he had come to love prepare for the loss of everything that mattered to them, and the guilt was eating him alive. He had the power to save them, but using that power would mean revealing the lie he had been living for months. That evening, he excused himself early and walked out to the pasture where he could be alone. He pulled out the old cell phone he had kept hidden in his backpack, the one he had never used since arriving at the ranch. For the first time in months, he turned it on. The phone immediately started buzzing with missed calls and messages. Dozens of them from his father's office, from family lawyers, from private investigators. Jake ignored them all and scrolled through his contacts until he found the number he needed. His finger hovered over the call button for a long time. Making this call would solve Maria's problems instantly, but it might also destroy the only real happiness he had ever known. If Maria discovered that he had been lying to her about who he was, would she ever forgive him? Would she think that everything between them had been fake? But as he looked back toward the house, where he could see Sofia doing homework at the kitchen table and Carlos helping his mother with dinner, Jake knew he couldn't let them lose their home. Not when he had the power to prevent it. The question. With only 7 days left before the bank's deadline, Jake made the most difficult decision of his life. He couldn't bring himself to make that phone call to his father, not yet. The fear of losing Maria and the children's trust was stronger than his desire to save them. But he also couldn't stand by and watch them lose everything when there might be another way. That Sunday evening, after Sofia had fallen asleep curled up against him on the couch and Carlos had gone to bed exhausted from another day of helping his mother prepare for the worst, Jake knew what he had to do. He gently moved Sofia to her bedroom and tucked her in, watching her peaceful face in the dim light from the hallway in Carlos's room. He found the boy staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. "Hey," Jake whispered, sitting on the edge of the bed. "You okay?" "Jake," Carlos said quietly, "are we really going to lose the ranch?" Jake's heart broke at the question. This 12-year-old boy shouldn't have to worry about such things. "I don't know, buddy. But whatever happens, your mom is going to take care of you and Sofia. She's the strongest person I know. Will you come with us? If we have to move to the city?" The innocent question hit Jake like a punch to the stomach. "Carlos, there's something I need to tell you. I might have to leave soon to find work that pays better money. Good enough money that I could send some back to help your family." Carlos sat up in bed, his eyes wide with alarm. "You can't leave. We need you here." "I know, and I don't want to go. But sometimes grown-ups have to make hard choices to help the people they love." "But we are your family now," Carlos said, his voice breaking. "Aren't we?" Jake pulled the boy into a hug, fighting back his own tears. "You are my family. You're the best family I've ever had. That's exactly why I might have to go." The next morning, Jake was up before dawn. He moved quietly around the house, gathering his few belongings and putting them in his old backpack. He had written 3 letters the night before, one for Maria, one for Carlos, and one for Sofia. They were the hardest things he had ever written. In Maria's letter, he explained that he had to leave to find better paying work, but he promised to send money as soon as he could. He told her how much these months had meant to him, how she and her children had given him something he had never thought possible. He wrote that he loved her, even though he had never said those words out loud. For Carlos, he wrote about being proud of the young man he was becoming and how he knew Carlos would take good care of his mother and sister. He included detailed instructions for maintaining all the repairs they had made together and promised that even if he couldn't come back, he would never forget the boy who had become like a son to him. Sofia's letter was the simplest, but perhaps the most heartfelt. He told her she was the brightest, kindest little girl he had ever known, and that her smile had helped heal him when he was sick. He asked her to keep reading her books and doing well in school, and to remember that someone out there thought she was absolutely perfect just the way she was. As Jake prepared to leave, he made one last walk around the property. He checked the fence they had repaired together, made sure the gate latches were secure, and confirmed that there was enough feed for the animals for several days. Everything looked good, but he knew that without his help, Maria would struggle to manage it all while also dealing with the foreclosure crisis. Standing in the barn, where he had spent so many peaceful mornings doing chores with Carlos, Jake finally pulled out his phone. His hands shook as he scrolled through his contacts, looking for a number he hadn't called in 3 years. "Thompson Industries, how may I direct your call?" "I need to speak with Charles Thompson," Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Mr. Thompson is in meetings all day. May I take a message?" "Tell him his son Jacob is calling. Tell him it's an emergency." There was a long pause, then the receptionist's voice became more urgent. "Please hold, sir. I'll get him right away." Jake waited, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. He had rehearsed what he would say 100 times, but now that the moment was here, all his words seemed to disappear. "Jacob?" His father's voice came on the line, filled with disbelief and something that might have been relief. "Jacob is that really you? Are you hurt? Where are you?" "I'm okay, Dad," Jake said, surprised by how strange it felt to use that word again. I'm calling because I need help. Not for me, but for some people who are very important to me." "Anything," his father said immediately. "Whatever you need." Jake explained about Maria and the children, about the foreclosure notice and the impossible deadline. He told his father about the months he had spent recovering on their ranch, about how they had saved his life without knowing anything about his background. "You've been living as a ranch hand for 3 years?" his father asked, incredulous. "I've been living as myself for 3 years, Jake corrected. "Dad, these people don't know who I really am. They don't know about our money or our company. They help me because they're good people, not because they wanted something from me." "And you want me to help them anonymously?" "I want you to help them however you think is best, but I can't be part of it. If they find out I could have solved their problems all along and chose not to, they'll never forgive me. And I can't blame them." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Finally, his father spoke again, his voice softer than Jake remembered. "Son, where are you going to go?" "I don't know yet. Somewhere I can find work and start earning money to send back to them. Maybe I'll go back to California or head up to Colorado for the winter." "Jacob, this is crazy. Come home. Bring them with you if you want. We can figure this out together." "I can't, Dad. Not yet. Maybe someday, but not now. Just promise me you'll help them and don't tell them it came from me." After Jake hung up, he sat in the barn for a long time, trying to gather the courage to leave. Every part of him wanted to stay, to walk back into that house and have breakfast with the family that had become his whole world. But he knew that staying would mean watching them lose everything when he had the power to prevent it. Finally, as the sun was coming up over the desert hills, Jake shouldered his backpack and started walking down the dirt road that led away from the ranch. He didn't look back, because he knew that if he saw the house where he had been so happy, he might not have the strength to leave. About a mile down the road, he heard a vehicle approaching from behind. For a moment, his heart leaped with the hope that it might be Maria coming after him. But when he turned around, he saw it was just Mr. Peterson, their neighbor, heading to town in his pickup truck. "You need a ride somewhere?" Mr. Peterson called out, slowing down. "Just to the bus station in town," Jake replied, climbing into the passenger seat. As they drove away from the ranch, Jake watched the landscape he had come to love disappear behind them. Somewhere back there, Maria would be waking up soon and discovering that he was gone. She would find his letters and probably hate him for leaving when they needed him most. But if his father kept his word, within a few days Maria would receive news that would save her home and secure her children's future. She would never know that the help came from the man who had shared her table for 3 months, who had fallen in love with her strength and kindness, and who had given up the only happiness he had ever known. Maria woke up Tuesday morning to the sound of Sophia crying in the next room. For a moment she thought her daughter might be having a bad dream, but then she heard Carlos's voice trying to comfort his sister, and she knew something was wrong. She rushed to Sophia's bedroom and found both children huddled together on the bed, reading a piece of paper. Carlos looked up at her with tears in his eyes and handed her a folded letter with her name written on it in Jake's handwriting. "He's gone?" "Mom," Carlos whispered. "Jake left." Maria's hands trembled as she unfolded the letter and read Jake's explanation about leaving to find better work so he could send money to help them. The words blurred together as tears filled her eyes. He wrote about loving their family and how much these months had meant to him, but all Maria could focus on was the fact that he had left them when they needed him most. "Why didn't he say goodbye?" Sophia sobbed. "I would have made him breakfast. I would have asked him to stay." Maria pulled both children into her arms, trying to be strong for them even though her own heart was breaking. "Sometimes grown-ups have to make difficult choices," she said, repeating the same words she had heard so many times lately. "Jake thought this was the best way to help us." But privately, Maria felt angry and abandoned. How could Jake leave them, facing foreclosure with only 5 days remaining? How could he think that walking away was better than staying and figuring things out together? She had started to believe that maybe they could face anything as long as they had each other, but now that hope seemed foolish. The rest of Tuesday passed in a blur of sadness and confusion. Carlos barely spoke during breakfast, just pushed his eggs around his plate while staring at Jake's empty chair. Sofia kept asking when Jake was coming back, and each time Maria had to explain again that he wasn't coming back, at least not anytime soon. That evening, Maria sat alone on the front porch where she and Jake had shared so many conversations. The silence felt overwhelming after months of his steady presence. She had grown used to having someone to share her worries with, someone who understood the daily challenges of ranch life. Now she was back to facing everything alone, with even bigger problems than before. Wednesday morning brought another shock. Maria was feeding the chickens when she heard the sound of vehicles coming up their dirt road. At first she thought it might be Jake coming back, and her heart jumped with hope. But as the vehicles got closer, she realized it was a convoy of 3 black SUVs, the kind of expensive cars that definitely didn't belong in their neighborhood. Carlos came running from the barn where he had been doing his morning chores. "Mom, who is that?" he asked, standing close to her side. The vehicles stopped in front of their house, and Maria watched nervously as several people in business suits got out. The man who appeared to be in charge was older, maybe in his 60s, with silver hair and an expensive-looking coat. He walked with the confidence of someone who was used to being in control. "Mrs. Rodriguez?" the man asked politely, approaching them with a warm smile. "It's Martinez," Maria corrected, still feeling suspicious about these strangers on her property. "My apologies, Mrs. Martinez. My name is Charles Thompson, and I believe you know my son." Maria looked confused. "I'm sorry, but I don't know anyone named Thompson," Charles smiled gently. "You might know him by a different name. About average. Height, brown hair, very good with his hands. He's been staying here for the past few months recovering from an injury?" The realization hit Maria like a thunderbolt. "You're talking about Jake?" "His full name is Jacob Thompson, but yes. Jake has told me a great deal about you and your children." Maria felt like the ground was shifting under her feet. "I don't understand." "Jake said he had a falling out with his father years ago. He said he was just a ranch hand." "Both of those things are true," Charles said carefully. "We did have a terrible argument 3 years ago, and Jacob has been working on various ranches ever since, refusing any help from our family. But Mrs. Martinez, there's something you need to know about who we are." One of the other people in suits stepped forward and handed Maria a business card. She read it twice before the words sank in. Thompson Industries, Agricultural and Energy Solutions, Charles Thompson, Chief Executive Officer. "I still don't understand," Maria said, though a terrible suspicion was beginning to form in her mind. "Mrs. Martinez," Charles said gently, "my son is the heir to a multi-billion-dollar company. He walked away from all of it 3 years ago because he wanted to live an authentic life, make his own way in the world. But yesterday he called me for the first time since he left." Carlos had been listening with growing amazement. "Jake is rich?" he asked. "Very rich," Charles confirmed. "And he called me because he told me about your family's situation with the bank. He asked me to help you, but he made me promise not to tell you the help was coming from him." Maria felt sick to her stomach. "He knew," she whispered. "All this time, Jake knew he could have solved our problems with one phone call, and he said nothing." "Mrs. Martinez, please let me explain," Charles said, seeing the hurt and anger on her face. "Jacob didn't tell you because he was afraid you would see him differently. For the first time in his life, he had found people who cared about him for who he was, not what he had. He was terrified of losing that. But he let us suffer," Maria said, her voice rising. "He watched me skip meals to save money. He watched my children worry about losing their home. How could he do that when he could have helped us?" "Because he's young and he's been hurt before," Charles said sadly. "People have used him for his money his entire life. When he found your family, he found something real and genuine. He was so afraid of losing it that he made some poor choices." Sofia had been quietly listening to everything, and now she tugged on her mother's shirt. "Mama, where is Jake now?" Charles looked down at the little girl with kind eyes. He left town yesterday morning. He's trying to find work so he can send money to help your family, even though he doesn't need to work for money. You mean he left us to help us? Carlos asked, trying to understand. In his mind, yes, Charles replied. He thought it was the only way to help you without risking your relationship. He loves you all very much. Maria sat down heavily on the porch steps, trying to process everything she had learned. The man she had fallen in love with, the man she had shared her deepest fears and hopes with, had been lying to her every day for 3 months. But at the same time, he had also given up a life of incredible wealth and privilege to live simply with her family. Mrs. Martinez, Charles continued, I want to help you save your ranch. Not because I owe you anything, but because you saved my son's life, and more importantly, you gave him something I couldn't give him. A real family that loved him unconditionally. One of the lawyers stepped forward with a briefcase. We've already contacted your bank and arranged to pay off your mortgage in full. We've also set up education funds for both of your children, and if you're willing, we'd like to help you expand your ranch operation so it can be profitable for years to come. Maria looked at all these powerful, wealthy people standing in her dusty yard, offering to solve all her problems with the stroke of a pen. It should have felt like a miracle, but instead she felt overwhelmed and confused. Why should I trust? Any of you? She asked quietly. Jake lied to me for 3 months. How do I know this isn't some kind of game to you people? Charles sat down on the porch steps next to her, and for the first time since he arrived, he looked less like a powerful businessman and more like a worried father. Because, he said simply, my son has been missing for 3 years. I hired private investigators, I contacted police departments across the country, I did everything I could think of to find him. And then 2 days ago, he called me not to ask for help for himself, but to ask me to help a family of strangers who had shown him kindness. He pulled out his phone and showed Maria a photo, Jake laughing with Carlos while they worked on a fence, both of them covered in dirt and looking completely happy. He sent me this picture while we were talking, Charles said. I haven't seen my son smile like that. It took Maria 3 days to fully process what Charles Thompson had told her about Jake's real identity. During those days, she found herself swinging between anger at being deceived and a growing understanding of why Jake had made the choices he did. The mortgage papers were signed, the ranch was safe, and the children's college funds were established. But Maria still felt like there was a huge hole in her life where Jake used to be on Friday evening. She was sitting on the front porch watching the sunset when another vehicle came up their dirt road. This time it wasn't a convoy of black SUVs, but a simple pickup truck that looked familiar. As it got closer, Maria's heart started beating faster. She could see Jake's silhouette behind the wheel. "Mom!" Sophia shouted from inside the house where she had been doing homework. "Jake's back." Both children came running outside, but then stopped uncertainly a few feet from the truck. So much had changed since Jake left that they weren't sure how to act around him anymore. Was he still the same person who had taught Carlos to fix fences and help Sophia with her math homework? Or was he now someone different, someone wealthy and important who might not have time for them? Jake got out of the truck slowly, his face nervous and hopeful at the same time. He looked tired, like he hadn't been sleeping well, and Maria noticed he was wearing the same clothes he had left in 4 days earlier. "Hi," he said quietly, not sure if he should come closer or keep his distance. "Hi yourself," Maria replied, trying to keep her voice neutral, even though seeing him again made her heart race. Carlos was the first to break the tension. "Jake, your dad told us you're really rich." "Like really, really rich," Jake winced slightly. "Yeah, I am. Or I could be if I wanted to be. But Carlos, I need you to know that everything between us was real. When I taught you to rope cattle and fix fences, that wasn't some rich guy playing pretend. That was me being myself for the first time in years." "But you lied to us," Sophia said, her voice small and hurt. "You told us you didn't have any family." Jake knelt down so he could look Sophia in the eyes. "You're right, sweetheart. I did lie about that, and I'm sorry. I have a father who loves me, even though we fight sometimes. But I never lied about caring about you and your brother and your mom. That was the most honest thing I've ever done in my life." Maria watched this exchange between Jake and her children, seeing how carefully he was choosing his words, how much he wanted them to understand and forgive him. Despite her hurt feelings, she could see that the Jake who had left was the same Jake who had come back. Money hadn't changed who he was inside. "Mom," Carlos said, turning to look at her, "are you going to let Jake come back?" It was a fair question, and one Maria had been asking herself for days. Could she trust someone who had kept such a huge secret from her? Could she build a relationship with someone whose life was so completely different from her own? "That depends," Maria said, looking directly at Jake. "Are you planning to keep any more secrets from us?" Jake stood up and took a step closer to her. "Maria, I know I messed up badly. I should have told you the truth weeks ago. I was just so scared that if you knew about my money, you'd see me differently. Or worse, that you'd think I was lying about my feelings for you and the kids. And how do I know you weren't?" Maria asked, though her voice was softer now. "Because," Jake said, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a small object, "I spent the last 4 days making this." He held out a simple ring made from twisted metal wire. It wasn't fancy or expensive looking, but Maria could see that every curve and detail had been carefully crafted by hand. "I made it from some copper wire I found in an old barn where I was staying," Jake explained. "I know I could buy you any ring you wanted, with diamonds and gold and whatever else. But I wanted to make you something with my own hands, something that shows you who I really am when all the money and family business is stripped away." Maria took the ring and examined it closely. It was rough around the edges and clearly handmade, but it was also beautiful in its simplicity. More importantly, it represented hours of work and thought, someone taking the time to create something meaningful rather than just buying it. "Jake," she said quietly, "I need to know something. If you came back to us, what kind of life would we have? Would you expect us to move to some mansion and live like rich people? Because that's not who we are." Jake shook his head immediately. "I don't want to change anything about how we live. Well, except maybe we could afford to fix the roof and buy some better cattle. But Maria, I fell in love with this life, with this place, with the three of you exactly as you are. I don't want a mansion. I want to wake up in that little house and work this land and help Carlos learn to run a ranch and read stories to Sophia." "But what about your father's business?" Carlos asked. "Don't you have to run the company someday?" "Actually," Jake said with a small smile, "my father and I had a long talk about that. He's offered me a position running a new division of the company that focuses on helping small ranches and farms become more profitable and sustainable. It would mean I could stay here and work with families like ours, using the company's resources to help people rather than just make more money." Sophia clapped her hands together excitedly. "So you could stay here and still have your job?" "If your mom will have me," Jake said, looking at Maria hopefully. Maria felt tears forming in her eyes as she looked at this man who had given up everything he knew to find something real and genuine. Yes, he had lied to her, but he had also loved her and her children enough to walk away from them rather than risk their safety and security. That had to count for something. "There's one more thing I need to know," she said. "Are you absolutely sure this is what you want? Because my children have been hurt enough. If you're going to leave again, do it now, before they get too attached." "Maria," Jake said, moving close enough to take her hands in his, "I have spent the last 4 days in a motel room in Phoenix, miserable and lonely, thinking about everything I gave up when I left here. I realized that all the money in the world doesn't mean anything if you don't have people to share your life with. You three are my family. This ranch is my home. I don't want to be anywhere else." Carlos looked at his mother hopefully. "Mom? Can Jake stay, please?" Sophia joined in the pleading. "Please, Mama, I missed him so much." Maria looked at Jake, studying his face carefully. She could see the sincerity in his eyes, the genuine love and regret. Yes, he had made mistakes, but he had also proven that his feelings for them were real by giving up his comfortable life to work on ranches and ultimately by calling his father to save their home. "Okay," she said finally, slipping the handmaid ring onto her finger. "You can stay. But no more secrets, Jake. If we're going to be a family, we have to be honest with each other." "No more secrets," Jake promised, pulling her into his arms while the children cheered and hugged them both. 6 months later, Maria stood in the same spot in her front yard, but everything had changed. The house had a new roof and fresh paint. The barn had been expanded to hold their growing herd of cattle. Carlos was training a new horse that Jake had bought him, and Sophia was showing off her reading skills to anyone who would listen. Jake had proposed to Maria properly a month earlier, not with an expensive diamond, but with a ring he had forged himself in the workshop he had built behind the barn. It was made from metal salvaged from her late husband's old tools, a way of honoring the past while building something new for the future. Their wedding was small and simple, held right there on the ranch with their neighbors and a few family friends in attendance. Charles Thompson came, of course, and Maria was surprised to discover that despite his wealth and power, he was actually a kind and lonely man who was grateful to have found his son again. As Maria and Jake exchanged vows under the desert sky, with Carlos standing as best man and Sophia as maid of honor, Maria thought about how much their lives had changed since that morning when she found a dying stranger by her fence. She had saved Jake's life, but in many ways he had saved hers too. He had given her children a father figure, given her a partner to share life's burdens, and shown all of them that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places. The ranch that had once struggled to survive was now thriving, not just because of Jake's family money, but because of the love and hard work they all put into it together.